Okay, hi. Abdul and Balkis, can you hear me? Abdul is chiming in from northern Iraq, which I think is so cool as an American. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, probably parts of Ukraine, North Korea. Like there's just places on the globe that feel so inaccessible. And to see such a cool person just hanging out in what looks like a gaming chair in northern Iraq really feels like a new narrative for me. Belkis is coming to us from Rome, where I assume you are just taking advantage of the constant delicious food all the time. Yeah,
Kind of.
kind of. I mean, I know I would have to be careful. Do you have a favorite?
Um, I think Italian food overall is really good. I don't really have like a actual favorite, but as a Tunisian, I still prefer my spicy and hot North African cuisine. But yeah, I mean, I really like everything about Italian food. So I can't choose at this moment.
Understood. How long have you been in Rome?
Just a couple of weeks.
And are you studying there? How long are you there?
I
When do you go back to Tunisia?
Yeah, I'm doing a master's program at Louis Guido Cardi. It's a university here, and I'm doing the master's in Mediterranean security and cooperation studies.
Oh, perfect. Well, we're going to ask you lots of hard questions
Mhm.
specifically about that. And I'm thrilled you have the answers.
I mean, I don't think I do, but I'll try. I don't think anyone has the answers. Maybe we
I
have
know.
ideas that could be implemented, but the answer is not easy.
Yes. You know what? I think that's a fair adjustment. I have to shake myself out of my own binary that there's something concrete to this when it is just a moving sculpture, a moving target constantly. Um, but Belkis, if it's okay with you, we'll start with you. As you all know, we are holding these conversations with people who have some ideas, broad ideas, or people around the world who fall asleep thinking about this at night. And that is sort of the prerequisite for chiming in here. We all know that the state of the world looks the way that it does, both from borders, control of currencies, controls of stories, often because men. In the global north, have made decisions on our behalf behind closed doors. And while we could be hosting these conversations just on Zoom, a handful of brave and very willing individuals are willing to do this in a very public space, in a public forum, to get us to a different place. Because certainly, if we want things to change, we can't do everything like it's been done before. And so, Belkis and Abdul, and possibly two other friends, may be joining us in this conversation to think about what the next world order could look like. And I hate that language in itself because world order feels like there's some permanent deity, godlike infrastructure of how we're going to organize as human beings. And one theme that continues to come up is this idea of building local community and decentralized power and what that means. And I'm very excited for that. But the part of me that's been very colonized is like, well, there still has to be some like organized, aggregated spot where everyone shares ideas and cross communication and rules. And so I'm learning at the feet of Abdul and Belkis and people like Saji from Search for Common Ground and so many others. So, Belkis, given given your very specific life experience as someone born and raised in Tunisia, and then um, processed through, grew up through conflict, and now studying what peace and security might look like in the Med. Um, can you help us understand what a transition to a new idea of peace and security might look like? Do you ever think peace and security was a fully understood concept or that infrastructure supported it? Are there new ways to think about what that could be and needs to be? Um, Obviously, I'm looking for a turnkey answer, but I know it's very broad.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I just want to clarify that, I think growing up in Tunisia, we weren't exposed to conflict as much as the Middle East was. The most recent, major event that happened really in the country is the revolution that kind of ignited the Arab Spring. And then from there, we went through transitional justice, periods of political instability, threats of terrorism, etc. So I wouldn't say, I grew up in a conflict setting as much as maybe Abdulrahman has in Iraq. But from my experience traveling, studying, working, interning in the US, in the Middle East, where I spent 2 years in Lebanon, also recently in Geneva, and now here, broadly in Europe, I think peace and security is really defined differently depending on where you come from. Not only because of different contexts, but I think also because of the environments we grow up in, the situation of the country. Also, like you said, the idea of colonization and decolonization, which is what I work on with my organization, Youth Transforming Narratives. And so peace and security has definitely been, at least in my opinion, shaped greatly by the Western white global majority, global North narrative. And the way we see it today is very much dependent on how it was defined during colonial times. And so, as a young, female that practices peace and security, the way it's being viewed right now, it doesn't really relate to me, and it doesn't really relate to a lot of young people who come from global majority countries who have seen the system collapse, like you said earlier, and really are asking for a new way of doing things. And so to me, there's a lot of dominance in the way it was also defined, even the structure itself. The way I've seen through my work, even being on the ground, working, for example, with Syrian refugees, what the refugee crisis meant for not only the Mediterranean but the whole world, but also the double standards, between accepting Syrian versus Ukrainian refugees into Europe. All of that, there's always some sort of like Western dominance in the narrative, where to me at least it looks like the system was created in a way that these countries will always have the upper hand. So, regardless of what we say, whether you're saying it at the level of international institutions or you're saying it at the level of your country, there is always some interference and they will always have the upper hand. So, I think now more than anything, we really do have a chance today to reshape the way peace and security has been defined in the past, and to make sure that young people, for example, are at the core of decision making. And through Youth Transforming Narratives, we aim to leverage the skills of young people to decolonize international peace and security, because this dominance also comes from a very colonial legacy in the way the world order has been set up, starting with the United Nations. And so it has to be, locally, the definitions don't really have to be, I guess, the same everywhere, because it depends also on the context. But any intervention needs to be locally led. It needs to be focused. It needs at least to have young people at the core of decision making, and a lot of minority groups and a lot of countries on this side of the world where we know best what it means to be in the middle of conflict. And I wouldn't say we have the answer, but at least we know how things should be implemented in a way where our narratives and our stories shine more than anything. And so it's, like I told you earlier, I don't really have the answer, but what I do know is that at least part of the answer would be putting young people at the core of this redefinition and this restructure of world order. Whether that can happen or not, or will happen or not, I think we'll have to wait and see. But what really needs to be done, and I always say this to my team, to any young person I talk to, young people, especially nowadays, and young people coming from global majority countries, we need to be aware enough. So we need to do the work ourselves. We need to be informed, and we need to mobilize and come together to push for this change. Because right now, I think we're at a very critical point of time where, because the system is collapsing, we do have an opportunity to rebuild it and reshape it. Of course, we'll have to go through the collapse, so many of us will have to pay the price for that. But this has never happened in, in history before. We've never had this window of opportunity that we have now. So despite this collapse, it is still a chance for us to rebuild the system in a way that makes sense also for our countries, where we don't have colonial legacies, where we're all equal in these institutions, where the world order doesn't favor one party over the other. And I really advise and I call on all the young people to be as informed as they can, to be able to read, what's written behind the lines, and be critical enough and confident enough to speak up and ask for a system where their futures, are, because all of our futures are at stake, right? With everything that's happening. And I always say this: the young people are the ones paying the price for decisions that were made on our behalf by very, very, I would say, old white men who decided what the future would look like for us. This could no longer be the case. And so now every one of us has the opportunity to contribute in this new definition and say what a new peace and security arena is like to them, what at least according to their communities or even their lives, right? What does that mean to them? What is it supposed to look like, and what are their demands? And hopefully now, with a small window of opportunity that we need to make use of before it closes, we can at least put forward a vision that is inclusive enough, that is also realistic enough, and can be done. But again, like I said, this doesn't come easily. It will be at a price, and having to remove a world system that has been that has worked for these parties for so long, that's not something to easily give up on. And so this is the way I see it, at least from my, very humble experience around the region and just traveling the world and talking to young people. I know Abdulrahman will probably have a lot of good insights as well. But yeah, as a North African woman, female in the field, we do have a lot to work on, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. But as I always, tell my team, we also don't have a choice. It's either this or we just live
Amen.
in, right?
Balkis, before we hand it over to Abdul, I do have like two or three quick clarifying questions for you.
Sure.
And they're hard. And you can also push back and be like, that feels too much like the old way, even in the way that I might frame this question. So let's role model that here, if that's the case. But you talk, the movement and organization that you've built is youth transforming narratives. And we all agree that we need news stories. And that spans lots of different, I personally believe, from the religious component to the stories and relationships we have with ourselves to the stories and responsibilities we have to each other, plus all of like the historical components and systemic ones. But you said like what peace and security looks like in Tunisia is different than what it looks like in Libya, is different than what it looks like in Iraq, and different than what it looks like here in Philadelphia. I'm between Philadelphia and New York. But can you define actually what peace and security is to you?
Yeah.
And then can you define, and maybe they're one and the same, how you want somebody like me to protect your peace and security in the position with the currency that I have as like an American voter, of resource, those kinds of things. So like what your definition is, and then how you want me to participate in your peace and security.
Yeah. So I think, obviously there's still a common universal human understanding of peace and security, right? The fact that we want to live in peace, right? We don't want conflict, we don't want war. And I think that goes for every country in the world. But the reason I said they're different is because contexts are different. And, the way even geopolitics in the Middle East is very different from geopolitics in North Africa. So my needs are not going to be the same as someone, as a young person in the Middle East. But for me, as a Tunisian, I think peace and security more than anything, it doesn't only mean the absence of conflict, but also be in an environment where we can flourish as human beings and our communities can develop. So it's also, not only living in a peaceful context where no one is killing anyone because of their faith or their belief, but also being in a context where we as a community can move forward and we can develop and we can flourish and we can advance and we can progress, and build on good governance, build on democratic values, build on democracy. All of these today, unfortunately, are becoming more buzzwords than anything, right? And even for me, and I talk about this a lot about how young people are being used in peace and security in a very tokenistic way, where we're just being added to a space so that they say, oh, look, we have a young person, so we've already covered youth needs. And that's not really the case. And that happens a lot, unfortunately, and happens in big events, it happens in institutions. I see it all the time. Um, and so with my definition of peace and security, I want to move past that tokenistic inclusion of young people, where this progress and this development, despite all different challenges, it will always put young people at the core of decision making. Um, and linking that to your second question, I'm a big believer in multilateralism, despite the fact that it's collapsing right now. But I still think, as human beings, we exist within a system, and we cannot live, completely away from each other. We have to collaborate. It's just the way the world is, and I think it's also our human nature. And so I think cooperation between countries must always exist, but it has to also be done in a way where we uphold and we always prioritize common good for all of humanity, not um, interests of countries. But of course, obviously, that's not the case. And whether you're a realist or not, a lot of governments still prioritize their own needs. And so for me, as someone who really believes in multilateralism and believes in, despite the UN being collapsing right now, I still think we need a body like the United Nations to be a ground for the world to come together and make, declarations and decisions. Um, we still need to work on reshaping institutions like the UN and decolonizing also the United Nations. But we still need that body. We still need that institution. And so for me, the second question that you ask is really, really important because, like I said, the fact that we exist within a global, human family, as they call it, the fact that multilateralism is at the core of global politics means also the decisions that you make as an American indirectly always will impact the region or will impact me as well. Um, and I say this to a lot of, for example, my friends in Europe or in the US when they ask, how can we help? And so a lot of what I say is that and like I said earlier in my call for young people, you need to be informed. You have to do the research, you have to look for the information, and you have to be critical enough so that also the information that you find is not biased, it's not lies, it's not false news, it's not false information. And that's not easy to do, especially today with all the chaos that's happening in media. And so it's very important, for example, when you vote, right? When you select your congressman, anything like that is literally crucial to American politics, which will be crucial to the world because we like it or not, the US is still, as they call it, world police. And so when you vote for a representative, you have to understand the agenda and what is their stance, for example, on foreign policy. And would you agree with what he would do or he would put forward? And would you agree with what the government later on might be influenced in doing? Um, so all of these are very important questions, I think, to ask oneself. And of course, the more dominant your country is in politics, the more I think impact you have. And unfortunately, just the reality of the world and how things are right now. So it's just crucial, really, to understand context really well, even in situations where you have, for example, a live genocide happening right now in Gaza. So many young people, took time to understand what was happening, but they eventually did understand it. And when they did, they changed their stances on, the representatives they're voting for, the people that they're supporting, etc. And I mean, it's not easy. I definitely understand that. And I lived in the US myself. for quite some time, and I know how, when you're far away, even geographically, it tends sometimes to be a bubble, and you might not even notice until something would burst that bubble, and you would be like, oh, wait a second, there's a whole new different world, right, outside of this. So I know how difficult it can be, and I really don't put the blame on especially on young people, because I think we're also victims when it comes to the system. But I do hold young people responsible right now with the access that they have, especially to the internet, to research, to everything. I hold them accountable, and I tell them that, as a person voting, you need to do your due diligence and make sure that you're not taking that decision lightly. So yeah, so I don't know. I mean, the world is really interconnected, right? And um, I know when it comes to this sort of big decisions, it does influence sooner or later. The impact is always there. Same thing with, for example, the boycott movement. A lot of people didn't believe in it until it worked. And the thing is that, it takes time, right? And it's not easy, but we have to take the step, and we have to take it now, because again, we don't have
Mhm.
a choice. It's either that or complete
Yeah.
chaos.
Balkis, thank you so much for all of that. I forgot to mention that sometimes I look to my right and it's me juggling a couple of other screens. I'm also taking notes and responding to other people. So I'm not, you know, shopping over here. And then two, I also want to add Saji, who is joining us now. He didn't get the memo to wear a white shirt though. Next time. Next time. Saji, hey, hi, thank you.
I'm so sorry I'm late, but please
Don't
continue.
please, you're never apologize for that. Abdul Rahman, I would love to hear. I theoretically want to ask you the same question, like, what does peace and security actually look like? There's a part of me that's like, oh, we know broadly what it means for human beings, that they can like thrive, that the artists can create art, and the caretakers can caretake, and everyone has access to their basic needs. But somebody who has, and I really appreciate that, Belkis, helping frame the difference in what post-conflict looks like between you and Belkis. But somebody who is in northern Iraq, who that specific voice and that life experience really does not get lifted up here in the States, full stop. And somebody who is at the tip of the spear in terms of really trying to build youth movements in a region where youth movements have been very, very, very intimidating to the status quo, to the global north. Like, how are you holding that? How are you both building the movement, knowing that people in the West are like, "Ooh, but don't go too far. Like, just stay seated, maybe." Maybe you want to start with what peace and security, the definition of peace and security looks like for you.
Yes, Jenna, thank you so much. And hello, Balkis. Hi, Saji. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. And I will start with this. Wow, Balkis. The power. You're very talented. Thank you so much. So today I will be the one wearing the casual hat. I will ignore using formality or fancy words, because I'm coming from an environment, and I will try to speak on behalf of many, many young people on the ground, protesting, maybe posting on social media and get arrested. So I will start with numbers. In Iraq, we are 45 million, 55,100, 68% of this population under the age of 30, and about 40% under the age of 15. So the majority are young people. So the question is, what happened when the minority eats the majority's rights? When the majority have no access to wealth, have no access to power, have no access to freedoms they can't express. Here the chaos happened back in October 19, and it was like A small steps escalations started after 2003, after the U.S., whatever you call it, invasion, attack, whatever.
What do you want us, actually, I think this is really important. What do you want us to call it?
It's for me, take it or leave it. It was an invasion for the oil. Full stop. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, talking about facts or reality today, here's the, let's say, the thing. So today I will talk and reveal the reality on the ground, not the facts and truths. So, um, since 2004 until 2019, young people kept suffering from the system, from the whole thing happening in Iraq. There was no um, equality. There was no access to anything. Even the infrastructure have been destroyed to scratch. So, in October 19, there was big revolution. We call it Tishreen movement in Iraq, and in just 3 days, only 3 days, about 2,000 young people have been killed in streets. So you can imagine what happened in just 3 days in Baghdad and Basra and some other governorates. So let's keep it simple. Peace is the condition of violence. Peace is the condition when the violence is absence. When people can live with dignity. Full stop. That's it. Let's not complicate things. And for security is the protection of civilians to not being killed in streets. I was born in Baghdad, 1995, and when I left Baghdad, living here in Kurdistan region, it's in somehow it's more safe. But when I look back, comparing Iraq 2003, 2016, 2019, the revolution, 2025 now, there is good, let's say, indicators that we're heading toward the right path. So nowadays in Iraq, what is needed is peace and security and basic needs. So we can't overthink and overload, let's say, our ideas and think about um, um, the new AI techniques. What is needed in Iraq nowadays is the basic needs. That's it. I will stop here.
Question for you. So there's been some conversations within these conversations over the past couple of days around aid and what that actually has to and could look like in different parts of the world, whether it was Burundi or Afghanistan. And can you, in terms of your points around basic needs and this simple definition of peace and security, if you could redesign the funding and accountability systems for those basic needs, either how the global north or however international organizations contribute to the rebuilding of Iraq or the building of Iraq, like what would that look like? How could aid respond to what locals actually want?
This question have been asked 3 to 4 years ago when the first ever report on protecting civic spaces have been launched. I think Sajid recalled that, and my exact question was that to make those aid supports, those big programs, etc., conditionalized in protecting human rights. You cannot come and say, "Hi, I have $2 billion. I want to let's say build the infrastructure. Let's spend it." So there's specific tiny paths those funds should go through, and it's all big disaster. Once upon a time, I had a donor meeting with one of the UNs, and they said, "Hi, we have some funds to sponsored the YPS agenda back in 2020. I said, okay, great, let's do it. Civil society is ready. And when they asked about specific an institution in Iraq, they said, okay, we will go through that facility and um, disseminate the fund and make it happen to be implemented on the ground. I said, oh, do you know who's ruling that facility and who's in charge? They said, oh, who? I said, one, two, three. You cannot do that because the money will be lost. It's fully corrupted system there. And straightforward, they said, oh, but we have no other path. It's the only path we have to follow. It's our system. Even though they knew that the money will be lost, they insist to fund and through the money and spend it through that facility. So we have to not think about the outside or far apples and bananas. Let's go to the root. The core system is corrupted. You have to believe in building infrastructure and helping people. It's not a decor. It's not a fancy things you're doing in front of the international community. People is in need. You want to help them? Please come and spend it directly yourself. There is many CSOs and INGOs, well known, clearly well focused and clearly organized. They can implement it on the ground in a way that community can take benefits. But when you insist to spend that money through corrupted facilities that you know they are corrupted, so it does make no sense. I know I'm speaking a language maybe some people they won't hear it, but we're on Twitch, Jenna, so let's speak up what street says.
Yeah, of course.
I can use formal language. I can be super formal.
No, don't bother. No time.
Saji knows I'm part of formal negotiations with 13 ministries in Iraq, developing a national action plan. I can use all that words, but we're on Twitch. Please let's keep young people listens to what's happening.
Okay, so let me ask you a question.
Mm.
And this is one that I don't have the answer to. So, for quick context, I was one of the organizers of the Women's March. Do you know what the Women's March is?
No.
It's okay. So, Trump was elected on November 9th, 2016. More or less, I would say like 9 to 15 core organizers came together and organized what was supposed to be a single-day protest in Washington, D.C. on January 21st, the day after he was inaugurated in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
It ballooned into 571 marches around the world. It's theoretically the largest protest in human history. I'm not interested in those numbers because there's no way to actually quantify it, but it was huge. And the people who had initially organized it, we came together because we were like, we have to do something. We have to do something, both with our like guilt and our shame and our desire and desperation to protect all the things, the things that we stand behind. It was very successful in that. The following week, Donald Trump put the Muslim ban. He created the Muslim ban. And as a consequence, because there were so many millions of people who came to the streets the week before, many millions of people were comfortable showing up at airports throughout the country to protest the Muslim ban. And so there's been like this just like cascading effect of like seeing and being seen and being comfortable going out to the streets. And this all, the Arab Spring, it's like when you see other people be brave, you get brave yourself, right? Bravery is contagious. What happened immediately after the Women's March, and it is, Abdul, we are being blunt here on Twitch, but I'm still not even ready to talk about it. That was 10 years ago. What happened after the Women's March is that there was this sudden like acknowledgement from the international community who cared about the values that we all agree on. And there was like, put them on the Time 100 list, get, giving all these acknowledgments. There was like a lot of like ego that started to be surfaced, I think, because people wanted to like latch on to names and brands and be like, they're going to lead us. They know what to do. We had no idea what we were doing. We picked a logo, we picked a date, we picked a cross streets. Like that was it. And yesterday on this identical call, Saji had invited a friend of his, Christine from Nairobi, and she was explaining that there was all the youth on civil unrest about a year ago in Nairobi. But there's become this like air of, oh, well, who has the iPhone that can go to the protest to post on their Instagram feeds, and who has the blue checks, and that this idea of like civic participation has become very performative. Now, we need both, right? We need to show that Jenna and Balkis and Abdul and Saji are in the streets, and we also have to keep our ego in check. When you use the example of the people who run that civic space, and that INGO showed up with a check to feed it into the civic space, and you say 68% of the people who are going to be in charge of the country over the next number of decades are under the age of 30 now, and also looking at the youth movement in the country, in the world, I'm really nervous that we're going to fall into the same traps that the people who we might consider corrupt, or we might consider our ego filled, or we might consider our power hungry, are going to fall into that same human trap, because it is very human. It's very egoic. And in a world where everyone is desperate for validation, particularly like all of us altruistic folks, like we still want somebody to be like, oh, good job. Someone's finally noticing that you really give a shit and you're doing it. How do we keep ourselves in line in a gentle, focused way? Because we run the risk of falling into the same corrupt tendencies, both knowingly and unknowingly. And it might even be worse because we're all performing here.
Mm.
I'm not asking you to be like the babysitter of the youth movements, but I think it's real.
No, Jenna, there's no straight, direct answer to that question. But talking about young people, and one day they will become elder and they will rule, they will become 45 and 50.
Oh my God, that's so old.
I know, but
I'm kidding. I am 45.
Come on. I listened to your conversation with Saji, the last chapter, and you was debating this with Saji. So I won't repeat what you guys discussed. But no one knows. Maybe I will become in a power position and I will be corrupted. No one knows. It depends on the people. For example, in Iraq, it depends on the election, and it's only 43 days from now, we will have our election, and there is very big fancy campaigns happening on the ground, and people should choose. The issue and the problem in Iraq that we don't believe in this, let's say, election system. The whole system is corrupted, so there is no faith in the election. And the last election, only 20% of the, let's say, Iraqi population, those who have right to vote, voted. So the rest have been assigned.
Sorry, can you say that statistic again? How many people who had access to vote actually showed up?
Yeah, let's say there's 32 million in Iraq. They have the right to vote. Only 20% of them went and voted at that day.
And
this is a disaster.
And the 8 different reasons for only 20% showing up are?
Yeah, those 20%, those people who have faith in change, who believe in democracy. And for me, as a young people, I have faith in democracy, and I believe it's the only way to change. Because speaking specifically about Iraq, every change happened in Iraq happened with the blood. It was supposed for tens of thousands of people to die, for a president to be changed, for a minister to let a minister resign. This is a disaster. So there's a significant mistrust between, let's say, the government and those 8 to 10 people who's ruling the country, and the people. I have complete faith that one day in Iraq, young people will rule the whole system, but it needs sacrifices. This is a fact. I hate facts, but this is a fact. We should raise our voices and take it or leave it. If you post something on social media demanding a right and you live in Baghdad, maybe you will be questioned. Maybe you will be in jail for months without a court warrant. But here in Kurdistan region, it's a little bit different. So I'm speaking freely. That's why I think it's my social responsibility. And with my broken English, I'm trying to amplify my peers' voices in the north and the central and the southern part of Iraq. And last but not least, so we can, let's say, summarize things here. Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine has been suffering from cancer. And take it or leave it, this cancer is moving to Tunisia nowadays. And maybe Balkis knows what I'm talking about. So it's our social responsibility to not let that cancer comes to our country. That cancer is the following. In Iraq, we are 9 different components and religions. We lived in peace and coexistence. But once upon a time, something came to Iraq and said, oh, look, that guys hates you. It's not right. But that cancer kept imposing those agenda. It's like a hard memory, a memory hard, and put it in Iraq. And it's full of viruses. People started thinking, oh, do you think that guy is really our enemy? Come on, guys, we lived in Iraq since 7 to 8,000 years here. We're not enemies. We live in one unified country. But this cancer is moving from somewhere in the Middle East and coming into our countries. So we should stop that cancer from imposing our minds. We should keep believe in democracy. We should keep believing ourselves. And we should keep the complete faith in our causes. For me, as Abdulrahman, I'm not working and advocating. I'm not a human rights defender because one day I want to rule or position or to establish a big facility. No, I'm doing this for my kids because I believe one day they deserve to live in a better reality and a better a place with good infrastructure, at least with basic needs. So I'm doing this for them. Yeah. Look, Jenna, I'm here thinking out loud. I can't formal and bold, let's say, those fancy words. So forgive my basic language today.
Please stop apologizing because your basic language is communicating a lot. Be kind on yourself because I'm tracking everything you're saying. I do have a follow-up question, and maybe Balkis or Saji, I would so appreciate. And Balkis, actually, I would love to hear from you on this. And Saji, any opportunity we have to hear from you is always beneficial. So jump in whenever. Balkis, could you define this cancer? Are you tracking what Abdulrahman is referencing when he is describing that? I would love to know a little bit more about what that is, or if you can add your own language to it.
I'm not sure if we're thinking along the same lines, but I think for me, honestly, the way I see it is, again, going back to human nature, you'll always have competing powers. You'll always have a few, people in governance who think they can take over the world, who are arrogant enough to think they're superior. And I think, unless, like we said earlier, we change the current system, we'll always fall into the same trap with a different, case. And so I think for me, what you said earlier about how do we make sure we don't fall also into this whole performative, I call it performative activism. And I posted one time about it on LinkedIn, and the post went viral and I got a lot of hate for it.
Really?
And yeah, and I actually disagree a bit with what Abdulrahman said, because for me, and this is why I told you I hold young people responsible, especially those who are leading these movements. And, it could be just my personality. My sister thinks I'm a very difficult person. But I think for me, it's really about, if you make the decision to lead a movement, to found an organization, to be at the forefront of activism, you have to do it well, and you have to always hold yourself accountable. And so when I wrote this post on LinkedIn, it was because I think it was CSW at the United Nations. And I remember I was following, a lot of activists, especially from the region. And I noticed this trend where it became more of like an Instagram influencer sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, honestly, I was pissed because, first of all, I knew these people, like I knew they weren't like this,
Mm-hmm.
but once they got that attention, their everything transformed. So to me, it was also like you lead this big organization, let's say, you have to sit down with yourself and reflect and self-criticize. And you have to also surround yourself with, and I think the answer to your question is the way to do that, right? The way to do that for me is to surround yourself with people that challenge you, not people who agree to everything you say. And even for me, the moment I find myself in a setting where everyone is agreeing to what I'm saying, I'm like, no, 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 I don't want you to agree. I want you to actually keep challenging me. But what happens is that once we are in those spaces, it's like an echo chamber. Everyone keeps saying the same thing. Everyone's like, oh, you're doing well, whatever. So when this happened with CSW, it became photos on LinkedIn, it became everyone tagging each other. I remember I saw like, come spend the day with me at the United Nations. I'm like, guys, this is not, you're not on a Vogue cover, right? You're discussing people's lives. I think we get so lost in this and we forget that there are young people dying. There are people who are hungry, right? You have, I mean, the genocide that is literally happening, like live streamed on Instagram, on social media, everywhere, not just, in Gaza. You also have an awful one in Sudan right now. So when I made that post, I got a lot of hate for it. And it really made me sad because young people, I noticed that young people were really unable to step back and maybe ask themselves, why is this person who's also in the field seeing it this way? And so I think the danger, like the threat is correct. You're right. Like it's very valid. We can fall into it. And that's why I said, you have to be a bit hard with yourself and ask, yourself, and always have these moments where you reflect on whether you're really making impact, because it's also human nature, right? We might like to be in the spotlight, we might like the recognition, but that recognition can vary. There's like a very thin line between actual impact and between performative activism. And a lot of what we have right now is performative activism. And I think this is also why a lot of youth movements don't really, like, very rarely there have been occasions where youth-led movements went anywhere, because at the end they fall into that. And so even with me, with YTN, with my team, I always reflect them, always like, and I always tell them, guys, you have to tell me to my face if what I'm doing, is doesn't make sense to you. Like, and I try to push for this, really. Text me and be like, Balkis, look, I don't agree with what you said, or I think you're being pulled into the UN, or like this post that I also made about romanticizing the United Nations and other institutions, right? Like, guys, get out of that bubble. We're being, because the thing is, when we also fall into performative activism, we will be a very easy tool for these global powers to use us for tokenistic efforts
Yes.
and further implement this colonial legacy that I keep talking about. So I think there is a way to solve it. And so by being, critical with yourself, by surrounding yourself with people who challenge you, by being open and actually listening to the other side, you can at least attempt to stop yourself from falling into this performativism, whatever it is, whether at the UN or even, on the ground. So I think it's feasible. And I think it's very important to be aware of it and to know, recognition is good, but at the end of the day, and this is a question I always ask myself, what I did, let's say I launched a project with YTN. Every day, are we moving towards progress? Are we moving towards impact? And is our progress, can it be concrete on the ground? What can it change? Because if you're not doing anything, if you're only doing it for the likes and for fame or whatever, and you're not really making any impact, then you're in the wrong. You're doing it wrong. So I think that's a very important question, and I wanted to thank you for asking that, because for me, what's been very as well, I think frustrating is even YTN, we're a youth-led but also volunteer-led organization, and I notice even the trend with people coming in to add it to their CVs to get a recommendation letter, but they're not really doing any work. And so even with my team, I always say, let's hold each other and ourselves accountable all the time. In terms of this, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have two thoughts. The first one is on the holding each other accountable. I know here in the movement, broadly speaking, but it's also because it's not happening in our homes. It's not happening in our personal relationship. We don't have the musculature, which is my favorite word these days. We don't have the musculature to hold ourselves accountable. Like I live in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and I'm surrounded by people who do not vote like me. And we just stay on the other side of each other's fences. We'll talk about if there's, a big rainstorm or a fallen tree, or, we keep it very superficial. And so there isn't even like this ability to like engage in complicated conversations with people we don't know very well, because there's not even the ability for people to engage in complicated relationships with their husbands or their fathers or their sons. And I am specifically referencing that gender. So, there's what happened in our movement in the early days post Trump's initial first administration is that the accountability was really like snappy and mean. And it didn't center confusion and vulnerability. It wasn't like, hey, I'm really struggling with this thing you said. It feels like it's missing the mark here. And so there's a little bit of like, the US like fell into the cancel culture kind of attitude of like, oh, they said this 25 years ago, don't talk to them anymore. I really hope there's an increased movement amongst public folks, public people in leadership to be like, I got that wrong. Like, how amazing would it be for leaders to be like, what I said 6 weeks ago, 6 months ago, 6 years ago, I got that wrong. But the other thing that I want to make note of, and thank you so much, as someone referenced in the comment about bringing up Sudan, we're just not saying it often enough, is that, and I think this is probably true, I can speak on behalf of the US and probably a little bit Europe here, is that in circumstances like genocide, Sudan certainly, but very, very, very much so related to Gaza, is nobody's felt like they've been able to do anything. That you have like the flotillas that keep getting intercepted by the IDF, but the only other thing that we can do is post. And I do, to your point that you made earlier, think that because there was so much posting, consistent posting, that minds started to shift and change, not just amongst the civil society, but also amongst electeds. So there's this like fine, constant line of like, well, we have to say something, but it can't be performative. And I remember one time there was a protest on behalf of protecting trans folks in the US. And I was like, should I be at home creating content explaining what transphobia is, or should I go out to the street? And there was this algorithm that I finally was like, I can't be everywhere at once. So I have to figure out what my highest and best use is. And that became a helpful discipline as I was pushing myself through the like of which 25 protests should I be at, of which social subject should I be talking about? Should I be on Twitch right now, or should I be trying to get on CNN? Should I be writing an article? Should I be trying to write a book proposal? Like there's so much to be done and said in so many different places that like the idea of what is our highest and best use, it feels like an interesting exercise. So I want to hold what the reason why this is called the land of and. I want to hold the and here that like posting is also helpful, but you also have to check your own ego. And if you can't have relationships with a boss who is so inviting like yourself, or sorry, if you can for feedback, but you can't have it with your father, like there's just like, oh my God, this is the it's hard to be human.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, no, that's very true. And I don't know, maybe I'm a bit philosophical as well, but I also always connected to, what we're like as human beings. Because, we also grew up in a space that has a lot of different power structures. So you have society, you have the family, you have your parents, you have your educational system, then you have your country, and then your region. And so we're in constant struggle with all of that. So I know, for example, myself, I grew up in a family where politics were discussed on a daily basis. Like I grew up watching Iraq invasion as a young kid. Like, I know what those things are like because I grew up in that context as well. So that gave me some sort of awareness at a very young age. But I do have friends from the same country, my country, who grew up in a very different context. So they might not necessarily know, and that affects a lot our thinking as well. But like I said, still, and again, maybe this is me being difficult, but still, I think we do have access now more than any generation before to a lot of information. And so we need to leverage that. And it's really a responsibility. We say we're global citizens, which is also some sort of performative, buzzword. But what does it mean to be a global citizen, right? Does it just mean to belong to the world, or does it mean to be responsible enough to make informed decisions where you know for a fact what you're, if you're purchasing this product, what does that mean? If, like I said, with the boycott movement. So I think we are, maybe unfortunately for a lot of people, but we are right now in a context in the world where as young people, we can no longer afford to disconnect from geopolitics. We just cannot get away from it. We're so much into it right now that, and compared to at least 3-4 years before, we are in the middle of everything. And like I said earlier, it has to be seen as a window of opportunity to change things, because I don't think this will happen again in the next 100 years. Like this hasn't, right? This is like our moment right now, and this is why I try to push for this work. But yeah, it's quite difficult. It's not easy, and my response is always to have your people, to have your circle, to have those who challenge you, because it's hard to do it by yourself. Really, it's not easy, and we're social beings anyway by nature. So yeah. Anyway, I lost my point, but that's what I wanted to say.
Can, Balkis, can I just jump on, just build on what you're saying? And Abdulrahman, also interested in your work. As young leaders, you're saying that you're in a world where things are rather unique, where you have access to so much information, and what you're feeling that happens far away and what happens in your backyard are uniquely connected to the urgency of doing something now, right? Because you have connections, you have people, and you have information coming at you, and you have an emotional, intellectual, spiritual response, and a responsibility in that space. Is that unique to this generation of young people, or do you think all previous generations of young people also felt? What's so unique about this generation compared to the previous generation of young people who are now in power making bad decisions? What is your role in this thing that you think you're making a better choice? I'm curious what
Yeah.
you think.
No, I think I think compared to older generations, we definitely live in a more digital world to begin with. For example, you have now AI, which you didn't have in the previous years. I think it just this access to a lot of information that we can leverage on that didn't exist before. Of course, access is a privilege, and I'm very much aware of that because I know even in my country there are young people who don't even have a stable internet connection, infrastructure, laptop, etc. So all that I'm aware of. But what I mean is for us who are privileged enough to have this access, being in this very unique point and rare point of history where things are being shaken a bit and where we have the opportunity to contribute, we also, at least I believe, we have the knowledge, the skills, and the access to be able to make better decisions, even just with social media, right? The fact that what's happening right now in many countries in the world, also Congo, the conflict is really bad, in Sudan that no one's talking about, and here I ask young people, have you ever wondered why? So all of this, I think all of this access really gives us an advantage where we can connect more with others in different parts of the world. And so I think it created in us some sort of empathy that might not exist with decision makers today, because before, when you live in the US, then you're right, you follow newspapers, you watch TV, but you didn't have an actual laptop or WhatsApp where you can send a message on the spot to someone who lives all the way in South Africa in just seconds. So that sort of connectivity, I think, is a point we need to leverage on. And I think that's also why today, world order is shifting. And that's why opinions are shifting about what's happening in the Middle East, because people are, for the first time, connected enough to see with their own eyes, horrors being committed. Unfortunately, it had to be broadcasted, and unfortunately, many people had to die. But if it wasn't for this, direct access and seeing what things are like, even though I know they're also censored in many parts of the world, this still changed, things for us. And this is why I think we have maybe a bit better chance at contributing versus young generations. And Saji, I'm not attacking your generation at all. I'm just saying there is much more um, for us to learn about here than we ever did today. And opening one book and reading a history book about what happened with the colonization of Palestine before is one thing, but talking to young people who are living right under siege in Gaza, or who've gone through this, or maybe me talking to Abdulrahman about the invasion of Iraq, that's a whole different story, because we connect human to human and we know what things are like on the ground. And I always say, one of the biggest flaws in the field in peace and security is that you have a huge gap between research, theory, and practice.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, for me, is one of the reasons everything is failing. Because when you go and you're on the ground and you're visiting, and Saji, I'm sure you know this firsthand because you've been to conflict countries, seeing it and talking to people is one thing, but just doing research from afar and reading a few things here and there, that's a whole different story. And I knew this idea for long, but I never really understood how important it is until I went to Beirut and I lived in Lebanon and I saw what things are like with my own eyes. So even for me, knowing this, going there was a whole different experience. So imagine someone who doesn't even know about the gap, how different their decision making would be and how different their analysis would be. So that gap, I think, is being shortened right now, as being it's decreasing thanks to the connectivity that we have through smartphones, through social media, etc. And I think that's what gives us the leverage as this generation.
If I can, Balkis, I want to bring in Abdulrahman too, if I may, because I want to make sure that we have time for this before we run out of time. Is what values do you think this generation should embrace to make sure they don't make the same mistakes the previous generation of youth leaders have made to get us to where we are today? Because it's the youth leaders of yesterday are the ones who are leading the world today, right? So youth leaders of today are the ones who are going to lead the world tomorrow. So to avoid those mistakes, what, because you're highly educated, you understand these things dynamically. What values should we this generation embrace and say that these are the absolute necessary values we want to make sure we are making sure, like Abdulrahman said, his children have better alternatives and violence, distrust than others. So what are those values look like for you all?
Yes, thank you so much, Saji. First of all, it's so easy. I just wanted to echo what Balqis said about it's so easy to talk about a genocide, to talk about injustice in a country, in a region, comparing to someone who's sitting far away and doing a research. Because as a practitioner on the ground, we're seeing things differently from someone doing a research remotely. And it's not easy. It's not easy to hold. I highly respect Balqis that disagreed with me, and it's totally fine. But on the ground, when you see things differently, when you see your friend dying in front of your eyes, you will rethink thousands times before holding yourself accountable from establishing something that could be something bigger and bigger in the future. We're holding ourselves accountable in Iraq as activists and human rights defenders in our ways, in a way that we won't die, because every single move and every single word you're saying is monitored. And not that much of young people in Iraq can speak up because of many factors. Some of them are maybe linguistic factors, some of them are the barriers, the cultural differences, how people thinks, because not many people in Iraq could have the leverage to leave the country and see other countries how they think about Iraq. Once upon a time, I had a informal conversation on social media with a young man in Australia, and when I said, "Hi, this is Abdulrahman, I'm from Iraq," he said, "Oh, where's Iraq?" I said, "Middle East." "Oh, Middle East. Guys, you mean terrorists?" Like straightforward. I said, "No, it's not necessarily to be a terrorist in the Middle East." So those stereotypes should be voted on social media. How we do so, how we do that. So this is your responsibility as someone from Middle East living in Europe, but our responsibility on the ground in Iraq and Lebanon and Palestine and Syria is something else. Going back to what Saji asked me about the values, I think for me, for me as Abdulrahman, equality and coexistence is the most important value that we should build in Iraq and many other countries. Because Saji, you can't imagine to what extent we're divided on the ground. I know someone did a
Abdul Rahman, I'm so sorry. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that? I'm very ignorant to it. So to what extent, to whatever extent you're comfortable with, I would just any additional color you could add is appreciated.
which part you mean?
How
The last,
divided you are on the ground.
yeah, because if you want to, sorry, you're muted, Saji.
No, is the divisions between young people or divisions between young people and older people also?
Yeah, I couldn't hear what you said.
He asked if the division was between amongst young people or amongst young people and older people.
Yeah, both, like both. We're speaking both here because if you want to destroy a country, Jenna, first of all, you have to destroy their educational system. If there is no educational system, everything will fall within 20 years. So within 20 years in Iraq, many values have been corrupted. And nowadays, I see debates among young people debating some politic things. And they started to scream and just ignoring the fact that they are both Iraqis and live in the same country. This is terrifying, and this is one of the most important, let's say, towers and thematic areas that we're working on filling this gap in Iraq. There is 3 to 5 networks nowadays. We're formulating some programs specifically to show people they're unifiers, not the dividers. Because in Iraq, the only thing that can happen for better reality that we stand all together and fight for one cause, which is better reality for the next generations. It's really hard because dignity, freedom, and peace, those are all core values for us in Iraq. But on the other hand, we have to see and learn from other experiences from other countries. I've been in Nairobi last week, and I saw how people think and define peace. I saw how people look at when people hear Iraq. Oh, Iraq, you're very tough guys. You're fighting. Oh, no, we're not fighting. We're not fighting. We're a civilized country that believe in peace, and we're not fighting each other. There is stereotypes even in Kenya about us. So just imagine that many countries, including Kenya, think that Iraq is a country that everyone is fighting everyone. This is wrong. This is not the right thing to impose on social media. We're living in a decade, in a time that everything is justified. Think that nowadays on social media, they're justifying genocide in Gaza. Just imagine, and there's big debaters on social media like debating, no, should be 1, 2, 3. They're justifying people dying. So what is the thing? What is the good in that young people in Iraq advocating for some core values, speaking up on social media, and after 3 years he is dead? So who's following that legacy? Who's holding that responsibility? We're holding ourselves accountable in Iraq, but in our way, because we're translating the reality into action, not the truth and facts into action. And this is really hard. And I know the word, and I had many debates and informal conversations with people in the US from Europe, and they totally agree with me. But when I followed some of them on social media, I noticed something else. This is the disaster happening on the ground. This is the thing that we're suffering of, that people in front of you saying something, but on your behind, they're attacking you very, very bad. And this is what I hate about people nowadays. Because as a civilized country, we have the right to live. We have the right to follow the global digitizing, I don't know, the new generation of AI technologies. We have the right to be part of that, let's say, movements. The whole world is evolving, and just imagine there will be a big summit next few weeks, and Iraq is not part of that. Why? Because there is a stereotype that Iraq is a country that follows Iran. Don't put them in that loop. Every single country in the Gulf is part of that negotiation summit, and Iraq is not part of it. So it's really hard, Jenna. It's really hard to unpack things. There is many areas I want to talk about, but it's not the right place because it's not our arena. Politics is not our arena as young people, and Saji knows I never talked about politics. But I don't know, for some reason, I want to reveal everything today, but I can't. I just can't.
Well, we're here when you open the floodgates. And we can also hold your discipline too. Um, okay. We could talk for a long time, and I want to respect everyone's time. In a very brief sentence, short paragraph, if I were to say to you, you have a magic wand, what would be one systematic, one idea, one for you, Belkis, story that you would want to see changed, that we could carry the torch on, that we could build together, that we could share on your behalf in other spaces that you might not be present? Do you have I would love to see a fill in the blank if we're thinking about what a new organized way of existing together might look like?
That's hard
It's
because
very
there's
hard.
so much. Yeah, there's so much that needs to be done, and I think for me, at least according to what I believe in, I would love to see a world where we have a decolonial, equal, and inclusive world system where young people are at the core of decision making, and where leaders and decision makers and policy makers hold values, like humanity, like empathy. They prioritize collaboration over competition, and they have respect for everyone, regardless of where they come from. So that, like Abdulrahman said, we don't live in a world where a genocide is being justified, or we have to prove the humanity of some people who live on a different side of the world so that we don't kill them. So that's what I would like to see. For me, it's really the core of it is this continuous legacy of coloniality, which is not only of specifically of land, concretely of land, it's also of minds, of education, of culture,
Mhm,
of governance, of political systems.
mhm.
Yeah.
Jane, let me jump here. Once I've been asked that question, we're very good in shaping and unpacking the issue and the problem, but when it comes to the solutions, they told me you're very bad in civil society. You're just shading the light on the problem. What about the solution? I really liked what Balqis just said about um, that those, let's say, people who empower, they hold themselves accountable to respect human rights, etc. How do you think that's achievable? How we can achieve that? What is the magic trick that we can use? If you're a witch and you have that magical stick and poof, you can fix it. Because I really want to hear it from Balqis.
You mobilize. And that's why protests can be powerful. That's why I said you need to have your group with you. That's why I talked about young people. You mobilize. And it's it's really, I hate to paint it as like two sides against each other, but at the end
Mm,
of the day it really feels like that. It feels like, you have this wall that's not moving, that keeps hindering your progress, and you need to push it. You can't
mm,
push it alone. You have to push it with other young people, and when you all come together and put your hands on that wall and you push it, then it can move. It takes time, it takes effort. Um, it's dangerous for a lot of young people in many parts of the world. I've worked with a lot of human rights defenders, especially from Sudan and other Middle Eastern countries. And I know it comes at a price. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's their lives or their families. So I understand the difficulties in that.
mm.
But again, this is why you have your people, because when you have that group of young people that you mobilize with, they can somehow at least try to protect you, right? And I don't think, like I said earlier, we really don't have a choice. So we have to mobilize, we have to keep pushing, we have to keep asking for change, we have to participate, we have to show up. Even when you have other young people who do a lot of performative activism, you have to be the voice who says, I disagree. And I do that a lot of the time, I know personally, not just on LinkedIn, but even on the ground. And it's been quite difficult, at least, on LinkedIn. I always joke and I say when young people reach out to me and they ask about, how do you have like the strength to do this and things like that. I'm like, guys, I am doing nothing compared to young people on the ground fighting for human rights, because I'm still protected by the screen. Even if they send me hate messages. I mean, I've been part of that. I've been threatened. My profile was shared in WhatsApp groups or whatever. I can still defend myself, but it's those young people. And that's why we need to speak up also sometimes on their behalf,
Mhm.
because we might be better protected than we are. So you need to mobilize. And this idea of global citizenship that I talked about, that unfortunately is very misunderstood and used tokenistically today, but it really also means knowing that myself, by choosing, let's say, to vote for a certain person or not buy a certain product, I am impacting another young person on the other side of the world, even if it's slow, like I said, and it takes time. So it's important to mobilize and it's important to disrupt. And it's also a lot of work, even being in Geneva. And you think you'd be safe there, right? I've been banned from events. I've been denied entrance to a couple of spaces just because I know I'm the one who, if I don't like something, I'll go to LinkedIn, and that's just the platform for me to vent. Like whenever I'm angry, I just go to LinkedIn and write post about it. And they know I'm going to vent, and so I've been denied just entrance to those events because of that. But the thing is, I always say that's how you know you're doing the right thing, and that's how you know you're speaking up about the truth, is when you get a lot of pushback. And I
Mhm.
know even with YTN, talking about decolonization, I spoke to a lot of decision makers in Geneva, and the moment I say decolonization, especially in these very Eurocentric, whitewashed institutions, they freak out. You can see it in their faces. And then I say young people, which I add to the equation of decolonization, and they worry even more. And I've been really, you can tell the conversation is going to completely shut down because of what I just said. um, so this is why, despite all of that, you still need to disrupt. And the thing, I think the trick here maybe is the strength but also weakness. You can't speak up alone, but you won't do much if you're alone. This is why mobilizing is important. So when you mobilize and you're only two people, you won't be heard as much as mobilizing and saying no as a group of young people. And this is where, at least for me, my experience for the past few years, especially last year, has been incredibly difficult, because I found myself the only person, let's say in a class of 40 people, who is saying no and disagreeing with what's happening. Because again, when you're alone, you can speak up, but you won't be able to do much impact. I know if there was a bigger group of you young people with me, we would have asked for a bigger impact. And so disrupting and mobilizing have to go hand in hand. They cannot exist without the other. And this is, I think, the link that sometimes is missing, especially when you have different ideas that you want to speak about and there is no one to back you up, in a sense. And I don't think there is some, magical recipe or whatever for that. Again, it takes time, it takes effort. um, but I still think young people have the skills to do it, and we've seen it happen. And so it's hard to not to give up, especially when you feel like you're not making a lot of impact, which is what you touched on earlier. But even for me, I've had days where I wanted to give up on YTN and I felt exhausted, and I was leading a team of 60 volunteers, right? It was a lot of work. I had to stay up long hours, etc. And I know I'm privileged. This is what I'm complaining about, right? At least I'm not complaining about not having electricity or not accessing food and everything. But it was difficult even in my sort of activism through YTN, and I wanted to give up. But every time I want to give up, I remind myself that I know I won't be able to live with myself if I don't do anything. But at the same time, I ask myself, if I give up now on what I'm doing, who will push for this change? And, if young people don't show up, who will? And that's the main thing that always keeps pushing me back, and gives me some strength to get back into this.
No one, no one. Oh, and wow, I'm so proud of you. Plus, I may add here, equipping young people with the knowledge and the influence and the agency is super. We also have hundreds of volunteers, and for me, when I ask a volunteer to do something, I give him full power to speak on behalf of the whole NGO, and to equip him with the knowledge. Otherwise, I won't say elders. Those people won't hear us if we're not equipped with the knowledge and the agency and the influence. I'm so proud of you, Balkis, honestly.
And Abdul Rahman, I have to say I'm very proud of you. I'm so grateful to Saji for pulling some of these voices together. In our final moments, Saji, I don't know if you have anything to offer, but I wanted to frame some of the takeaways from some of the other previous conversations, and then also what I'm hearing here that might be worth exploring. Does that make sense for you all?
I had one quick comment, if I may, build off of Jana before we close. One, I think, is it's important to really show the volunteerism in dollars and cents, euros and stuff. And when we were doing this in Nigeria and Kenya, when we actually looked at the minimum wage and the amount of people, amount of hours volunteering, and we were able to triangulate, it actually made people feel more powerful than just simply saying, I'm volunteering. Right?
Mm,
There's a need to actually quantify this to actually as a way to fundraise, but it's also a way to equalize the power that volunteerism contributes to society, community, and the individual. That's one. Second, the thing I keep hearing is the importance of strengthening young people's sense of agency. But doing that alone doesn't move mountains or systems. It requires institutions to understand and respond to strengthening that agency from an institutional perspective as well. Third, I think is what I'm also hearing is the need to do this safely, to ensure that young people have safe pathways to do it. So the safeguarding and protection mechanisms are important. Fourth is this actually requires great intergenerational trust. Where trust doesn't exist, there's a real huge need to improve the trust among young generations who don't trust each other and between young people and older generations, right? So when I say intergeneration, it's not just young and old alike. Uh, and the fifth is the critical aspect of what resources look like. This is not just monetary, but monetary plus other resources that contribute to this work. Because I think the common sense I'm taking away is that this generation of young people who got super connected, still lonely, still angry and frustrated. When companies are monetizing anger, frustration, and fear, you're actually turning anger, frustration, and fear into something good,
mm,
right? I think there's something very powerful about this generation's ability to mobilize and do stuff that is good in a number of different ways. You don't need 100,000 or a million people marching to actually do good. You can do things good by simply, like you said, Balkis, being a helping hand to somebody in your community, right? Speaking to somebody and saying, how are you doing? Those acts of love and courage are essential when we are dehumanized. So the work both of you are doing and the other conversations we've had with the people who are doing this courageous work is this is why we are creating this platform to really amplify the voices that you have, the wisdom that is coming from your voices, the energy that it is translating those voices into is powerful. So this is why we want to do this. So I want to say thank you for the work you do. Thank you for the courage you have, the brave voices that you have. You're amplifying other people's voices too. So just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you. You know. And with that note, Jenna, over to you. Close this up.
There's been some consistent themes both on Belkis, you talk about the brick wall and not being the only person pushing it down. I think what I'm personally chasing, and I have to hold myself to account, is that brick wall is not always totally clear. In some cases it is. We're going to have some additional conversations with folks who were previously part of USAID who have new ideas around what aid could look like in the form and the currency. Does it even need to exist? Like, what is this? What is this new opportunity now that it doesn't exist? Another idea that came out of this was prolonged conversations around the why should I care-ness. And Balkis, you talked about this a lot. How do we connect Congo back to voters in Virginia? How do we connect Sudan to Coca-Cola? How do we connect, Abdulrahman? It's important that we tell the right story about what happened then, and how do we connect our foreign policy decisions related to natural resources. So there's some people who are going to come together trying to think about, like, okay, how can I make the connection between Fairfax, Virginia, and what's happening in Gaza, and try to simplify that in ways that force this, like, oh man, everything I do actually does have an impact, not just in the midterms, not just in elections, not just when it comes to showing up in protest, but really being part of this, like, larger global community. I hear your note, Balkis, about the global citizen facade, or reality or not reality. There's a host of other conversations. One that I'm excited to demonstrate, which is, imagine if, and this is just an idea, it's probably crazy and silly, but if YTN and the Peace and Freedom Organization had a public forum to discuss, I don't know, bias of Iraqis and what's happening in Tunisia. I'm making this up, but just like a conversation where we could show that there's 100 volunteers watching something like this, and you have them all over the world, and then you have them in northern Iraq, to be able to show that people are mobilizing in a digital way to learn and be curious together, be very, very intimidating, I think, to people in power. And so I want to invite both of you to take advantage of the land of Anne, both as a brand and because we have all the technical production currency, that it's easy for us to turn this on very quickly. Tonight, we have 2 more conversations that will be 2 hours long each. One is with a 92-year-old anthropologist who is debunking all of the anthropological digs that have ever been uncovered, because they've been mostly led by white European men. And she's doing phenomenal work on that front. And then later on this evening from 9 to 11 p.m., we're doing a men and masculinity conversation led by just men. So I'm nowhere on the screen, but it's led by hosts specifically talking about this subject. And so people are very much showing up and saying, can I use the Land of Anne brand and the production behind it to be able to talk about this thing in a very global way? And I think there's a currency in that could be used, can be used. I don't know when, I don't know how, I don't know where, but it strikes me that there's to your point, if Iraq's not being represented at that big forum in a week or in 2 weeks, and admittedly, I'm not even clear which one you're referencing, but what if there was one where Iraq was at the center of it, and it was Iraqi youth at the center of it? Or what if, the movement in Chicago against ICE, which is the Gestapo that's responsible for just taking immigrants, first, second generation immigrants, but like, if you have Iraqi youth and then you have youth in Chicago who are coming together to, even if it's just to commiserate, it's really, really powerful and intimidating. So I want to offer that to both of you and see if there's anything specifically that you want to use this platform for or participate in. But I'll also probably, by the end of next week, we're going to do a post on Substack specifically about this conversation with a couple of clips. And I will make sure that gets to you and you can use them or not use them. But if anything comes up now or in a week or in a month from now, like, the answer is yes. The answer is yes. I think we can take advantage of these digital platforms to actually do what we're all trying to do.
Can I just add, I think, one quick note, just 2 things that I wanted to say that came up to my mind that I think are quite important. One is, and this is just a call to young people or anyone who's watching right now or who will watch in the future, always question the narrative you're being presented with. And this is why it's, the youth-led movement's called Youth Transforming Narratives, because narratives control everything from politics to media to why you vote to whom you vote for. always question the narrative, because from my experience, the reality most of the time is literally the opposite of the narrative
Yeah.
you're. And so it's very important to always question that. Why is Iraq, being presented as a Iraqis are terrorists, while Iraq, if you search even quickly on Google, it's the land of civilization and languages and culture and medicine and innovation, right? It's one of the biggest civilizations in the world, originated in Baghdad. So why do we shed light on Baghdad as this, like creepy place that's really far away that no one wants to go? And it's a very beautiful country, by the way. While when we talk about other countries, and I won't name names, they only, reached, I would say, major progress right now. Like, so I think it's very important to question the narrative. And at the same time, my second point is always ask yourself, then what? And this is one thing that really triggers me and frustrates me a lot about all of the conferences that I attended and the big events and all of them, right? I attend those and then I'm like, okay, then what?
Hmm.
Like, we came together and we talked and we shook hands and ambassadors took photos with us and we had representatives. All right, but then what are we going to do with that?
Right.
And I always ask this from a lot of even panels that I speak at. I'm like, what are you concretely going to do after we speak at the panel? Give me, I don't know, summary of what we said, send it for young people to read, give them insight, like do something with it. So what are you going to do with it after is very important. And I like, when I received your email, the land of and, because that's always my question whenever I leave. I'm like, and what are we doing next? So that's very, very important. And you would be surprised how much performative activism and tokenistic initiatives play into that. Because what happens, and I think this is another major gap in the system, is that they would bring us all together. They would have the forum of, young people from the Middle East, North Africa, and young people from the US. They'll have them in one room, they'll talk, they'll post the photos, and it ends there.
Yeah.
And it should not and cannot end there. And so those are my 2 points. Always question the narrative and always ask for what will happen after anything.
Balkis, I have a quick question for you as an end. Do you think that there's an opportunity or interest? Do you have the interest in potentially collaborating on a series of conversations about narrative? Meaning, what if we had a specific conversation about Iraq and Abdulrahman and 3 other folks, maybe he helped curate the conversation to tell the story of their country then and now and what they want for the future. So instead of like, and then we could do that too from, we could look at however many subjects, conversations that we think the narrative is being jeopardized around or has to be rewritten. I spend a lot of time on television, and everything is boiled down to a soundbite. I mean, truly 4 or 5 sentences. I can't even tell you about this cup of coffee in 4 or 5 sentences, but the most complicated subjects of our time are boiled down into headlines. And so I wonder if there's interest in potentially spending time here on, and we did one once a month where we said, okay, we're going to talk about this one narrative, and here are the 7 different perspectives or the 7 different ways to look at it, or multi-generational perspectives on the subject. I don't know if you think that that would be helpful.
No, definitely. I think that would be very helpful, especially, if you want to talk about youth and the situation of Iraq. Obviously, that's for Abdulrahman, not for me,
Yeah.
because that's his reality.
Yeah.
But I think that would be very helpful. Yeah, just I'll have you discuss the details with him, especially about the safety of also bringing young people on here.
Marcus, I think the other broader question is around how narratives shape culture and beliefs and ideologies, right? So if
Yeah.
you can just simply take the idea of colonialism, right, and think about how colonialism has shaped ideologies across borders, across boundaries, across generations. So it's the idea of the narrative or culture shaping as a theme, but let's take colonialism as a bigger theme, and under that, how narratives have shaped, how colonialism has shaped the stories that we hear and
Yeah,
the
that's
lives
really
we live.
interesting.
That's
That's
No,
another.
really interesting.
I love, like, whenever you talk about coloniality, count me in, because I think that's really at the core of it. And even with language, and I think Saji touched a bit on that as well. And I know, we're doing a lot of work on decolonizing language. Most of the things I noticed, for example, in my work with a couple of actually big UN agencies or even US funded, is that they use words like empowering young people, strengthening capacity building. And I'm like, empowering gives you the impression that young people didn't have the power, but you will give them the power, which is not true, right? And strengthening, and I saw this a lot, especially working on international development projects in Tunisia, strengthening the capacity of the sector. So it makes it look like the sector didn't have some sort of strength in it, which is also not true. So this language is also very colonial, and we use it without actually realizing. And this is just a small detail to show you how narratives are important and how they play into how young people are shaped and how our countries are being promoted on media, whatever. So even talking about language and how to correctly use it, so that we don't take away, so that we don't really push for these colonial legacies, I think that's very, very crucial. And many people will not be happy with it, but we'll have to talk about it.
Do you think, is there a conversation, just specifically pretend you were going to give like a 101, and it could be 20 minutes or it could be longer, conversation on decolonizing language, where you can say, here's why the word empowerment is problematic. Here's why the word, whatever it is, whatever the long list is, I don't know if that's of interest, but if we do it here, I can record it, I can clip it, and like many hundreds of thousands of people will see it, because even someone who works in, trying to gender parity or violence against women and girls, like I've never even thought about the term empowering as being problematic. But the second you say it, I instantly catapult. I instantly am like, oh no, shit. Of course I'm never using that.
Yeah. And see,
So-
that's because it's so well embedded into how we're functioning right now.
And same thing with the word radical.
Oh my God, wait, tell me about the word radical.
So was Jesus. So was Bezos.
Right.
Right?
Right,
The
right,
other
right.
but radical always signifies radical extremist.
It has a negative connotation in it.
We need to reclaim that word radical, because the radical problems require radical solutions.
Are you open to doing a language, maybe just a one-off language conversation? I feel like you probably 5 words or 25 words, it would be helpful.
I think that should happen, but I also think Balkis, I think because of the lexicon, YPS lexicon we are developing in this to launch in December, this could be, we should have a couple of launches on it, and one of those could be on here, bringing the cultural narratives of these words, right? So you, Mirdul, and a couple of people can actually talk a little bit from this about YPS lexicon
That would be great. And
this platform.
no, I think that would be great. And also with YTN, we're finalizing a toolkit on decolonizing language, about a few terms as well, and how we want to change the way we use it. I think that's also very, very essential. So yeah, I mean, like I told you, count me in. I can talk about this for a year. This is what I write my research about. I love it because I really feel the impact of it once you get to that conversation. It's one of the things that I find most impactful. And where we use language to talk, like where we need words, and the more you think about it, it's funny because it gives you an existential crisis at one point.
Yeah, of course.
Now you're like, what do I do?
Oh no.
Right? Like, how am I going to use words moving forward? But it's a good existential crisis because it pushes you to find a solution. And so even with decolonizing humanitarian aid that you've talked about, I've done a consultancy with, I think it was Peace Direct, about decolonizing aid. And one of the things we talked about is decolonizing language in humanitarian aid and what that means.
So like on a decolonizing language conversation, I would send that out to our massive list and be like, Tuesday at 6 p.m. or whatever the time is. And there would be, because it's also important, the young people in Chicago and the young people in Paris, like they all want this. And I prefer that they learn from a brilliant Tunisian woman like yourself, who is on the front lines of it, both academically and theoretically. But to your point, like there's a way that we can push this into action so quick. So on that note, I'm going to send a follow-up because I know that Saji has to go and Abdulrahman has to go, and Balkis has to go, and I'm going to live vicariously through her in Italy, enjoying Italy. But I thank you all or thank the two of you so much for showing up and being willing to ideate out loud. And I mean it sincerely. If you all have any ideas, the answer is yes. We will move forward, because we talk about pie in the sky, but I know we're all eager to figure out where those brick walls are that we can push against together.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Thanks a lot, Jenna. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you also to Abdulrahman for his great work. I know it's not easy, but you were all behind you, so
I know, in 30 seconds, we implemented a project 3 years ago on changing those terms. I hear you, and I had to manage a project called Strengthening Civil Courage. So if you hear that, you will get the impact that the community have no courage. But when we tried for 6 months to change the vocabularies and terms, we found it's very difficult. It's very difficult to change those terms and words.
it is.
So we just failed. We just failed, and that project failed. We couldn't change those fixed terms that without those terms you get nothing from the international community. Yeah, we tried once and that didn't work. But I hear you. I hear you. You're right.
You know, it's a continuous conversation as well. I know with YTN,
Indeed.
we've literally been working on this, and I'm not joking, for about a year now. And it's just constant meetings and debates, and like, we do this, no, we do that, this is not the right term. It's difficult because language is rich, and also because, no offense, I have a BA in English, but English is not the richest language when it comes to terms. I think if it were in Arabic, we'd have way much more flexibility and terms defined to this.
Wow.
Yeah.
English
Well,
is
Yeah,
not.
indeed.
then let's take the right Arabic word, even if it requires a half a sentence definition in English, but we can infuse that into youth movements around the world with the Arabic term.
That would be possible, but it would be because also you need the word for it. You know what I mean? Because English isn't very rich on vocab. Like in Arabic, you'd have 20 different words to describe a friend, depending on
Yeah.
how you are to them. You know, a lot of things. So that actually is another challenge. At least I found, and I have a degree in literature. Like, I know English really well, and still, even for me, it was quite difficult. But I'll share with you the toolkit once we hopefully
Please.
finalize it very soon. But it's still quite tricky, and I know I wanted the project to be bigger, but we couldn't, because we also found ourselves in a huge debate, and it was quite difficult, which is why I love having this conversation with young people and any expert anywhere in the world, because they might be thinking about a term you don't have. Like, that's why it has to be a conversation. We need to throw
Totally.
in there and then see what we come up with. But
But
again,
don't you think
it has to also be from the point, they have to be people who believe in decoloniality to begin with.
But don't you also think that there's like something important about like the living, breathing exercise of it long beyond us? So instead of like even what your toolkit is, like every December 1st, bringing all the same, not the same people, but like all the different voices around to be like, does this toolkit still work? Maybe we need to move this word over in this direction. And that there's this to shake us from this like rules rigid, this is or isn't-ness. Because I never would have even considered the word empower. I have no idea where my blind spots are. And like we collectively have no idea where our blind spots are. So isn't even in a new world, isn't it our job to make sure we revisit that conversation constantly?
No, we should. And to me, I always say I'm working on this working group on decolonizing the structure of the United Nations. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was like, you know what we need? We need a working group within the UN that is on decolonizing language, and that keeps meeting every couple of months to see if the language needs updating, to see,
Yeah.
new terms came up. That would be very useful. And that is one of the ways we can decolonize. Language is very important, and narratives are very important.
Right. It's sort of like, this is such a terrible analogy, but you'll appreciate this. So going into the holidays, going into Christmas, there's always all these big sales because Americans, all we love to do is buy shit. And so when my kids see something that they like, I have a Google Doc and I just dump this stuff into the Google Doc. And like right before the holidays, I'll go and see if any of it's on sale and then I'll buy it. In the same way with language, it's almost like there just has to be like a Google Doc, a working Google Doc where you dump words over the course of 6 months or even 10 years. And you're like, we have to keep coming back to this one because this one might not be working anymore like it did 3 years ago. That there's this idea, and this is one of those things where like you and I can sit in a place like this and debate the word empower. And the UN's not going to do it. But one of the things that I'll challenge you on a little bit, Balkis, as a former UN employee of like 7 or 8 years, I don't need the UN to have these conversations around language. I need Jenna and Balkis to do it because I can take our rule book and send it to the biggest activists in the country, the biggest organizations in the country, and be like, here are the 5 words you can and can't say, and here's why. And it's so much more powerful than the UN.
I agree, but when I talked about the UN, I meant using language in declarations.
Yeah, sure.
You know, in reports to have to force actually the international community to use that language in their whatever they create, even in Security Council resolutions moving forward, because that has to be implemented. That's what I meant. But no, I agree with you. I think, yeah, the UN is not.
Well, maybe we can have another conversation because the whole objective of this is like, what is the new version of the UN? That is, I don't happen to personally believe that the UN is reformable. And I'm okay with that, having, again, someone who bleeds blue stand by the charter, the declarations, the conventions, all of those things. But I don't think the UN is reformable. And I'm totally cool with people like us coming together in these spaces to be like, what's the new thing that we build? Because, and on that agenda right now is we revisit language use every 6 months. You know, like what's the thing? Because at some point, like our Constitution in the United States, our Constitution has language in there that references the indigenous, the native nations, the 100 million people who lived here before the Europeans showed up. It references them as savages. That is still in our Constitution. And people like ride or die by our Constitution. 146 constitutions around the world have been written off of our Constitution. And like being able to be like, that was then. And this, we don't, like, there's a way to like depart from that. And so there's a part of me that's even like, I don't know. I just think there's an opportunity to build new.
No, I agree with you. And talking about narratives again, I was because I also studied American history and I was a big geek. And I know very well that you're talking about. But also Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder, you know. So you know, founding fathers, as much as we would like to idealize them, we're not.
I mean, I live in Philadelphia. We're coming up on our 250th anniversary of the Constitution. I keep saying we need to take that thing, put it in a Google Doc, and track some changes. Stat. And there's appetite for it, but that's why you see what's happening in the US is because, like you say, it gets people very uncomfortable when you hear the word decolonization or supremacy or whatever it might be, or patriarchy. They get very agitated, but they're getting so agitated because people are saying the thing. I mean, that's the response to it.
No, I agree.
Well, if you want to come on here and, oh my God, I want to hear about all your other ways of decolonizing the UN. We'll have to find some other time to do that.
You'll have to join because, yeah, it's a lot of work. But yeah, once we launch the community, the working group, I'll be happy to share more.
Please, I would really appreciate that. All right, Yujio, I wasn't expecting this would go 2 hours and 10 minutes. But I think it's just evidence that like-minded people like to spend time in each other's spaces, even if it's virtually.
True.
All right, I will send you an email and follow-ups and next steps. And if you have any ideas on anything, the answer is yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for the great discussion.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, and we'll be in touch soon.
Definitely. Thanks. Bye.
See ya. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.